Hello, welcome to another episode of Learning sCrypt videos. In this video, I'm going to cover the so-called compile time constants. Again, we can start from sCrypt.io homepage and then click documentation. Then from there, we can under language spec, we can click compile time constant. So before I dive into the details, so let's first define what is compile time. So a compile time, by definition, is kind of self-explanatory. It means during compile, when it's compiled, when the sCrypt contract is being compiled. So this is typically against another concept, usually regarded as runtime. So when in runtime for sCrypt contract, it means a contract has been deployed and now is being called, one of the functions is being called, public function. So after we differentiate these two, compile time and versus runtime, so what is a compile time constant? Then by definition, it is an expression that whose value can be known or can be computed during compile time. It doesn't have to wait till a runtime to know all the values to evaluate this expression. So why do they play a role here? Because there are certain scenarios in sCrypt contract that not any arbitrary types of expression can be used, but they can only apply when a constant that's known as compile time can be used. So what are some of the examples? So for example, we have seen this before, right? We introduced the loop bound. So basically for all sCrypt loops, you have to know the bound, how many number of times you are going to iterate in this loop when you write the loops. So that's one example. Another example we have seen before is when we define an sCrypt array, we have to know the size in advance, basically when we are writing the program. So that's another place where you need compile time. So what kind of expressions are regarded as compile time constant? So they are enumerated here. So first of all, of course, literals, for example, the number 30 or 42, right? Of course, they are compile time because you know by the literal value, that's a definition. Another common constant time, compile time constant is so-called induction variables. So basically, if you remember when we talk about loops, so we can have this type of induction variables to let you access the index of the loop we are currently within. So let's say I, j, and here, induction variables. They can also be regarded as compile time. And also static properties of a contract. We have introduced before, you define some constant variable, n, let's say static constant n equals to 3 in this case. And also they are initialized with a literal value. So in this case, this static properties can also be regarded as compile time constant. And lastly, so when you define a function, parameters, you can also declare them as static const. So in this case, they can only be called. The argument can only be a compile time constant. So when they are used, there are several cases. I think I mentioned two before. So one is loop bound, the other is array size. You can also, that's another one also, when you write to an array using the index operator, that also has to be at using a compile time constant. And lastly, when a function parameters is declared as static const, for example, we have seen one before, the repeat. Basically, it creates a number of copies when you initialize some arrays. So in this case, the size it must also be a constant during compile time. So we see some examples in this example. So for example, here n, that's a CDC because is a static const and also initialized as a constant here. But in this case, this one is not, because it's not initialized as a constant. It's initialized with an integer expression. So we can also see function parameters when you declare, you can also make them only take CDC types as arguments. So in this case, the FC is also CDC. That's why it can be used as an integer. The array size, both in the following parameters and also in the return type. Same we can see here, repeat. So basically it takes the CDC as a second parameter. So also for the loops, you can also use the loop count, which is we define here as a CDC. The loop you can use here. So I hope this is useful. And if you have any questions, please leave me a comment. And until then, I will see you in my next video.